is high-functioning autism. He's always been getting up early, like 4:30 a.m., and is so hyper and jumps on the couch and talks really loud. He acts good at school, but at home he is out of control, like hyper, mouthy, and somewhat aggressive. Is that normal, and what can I do?
Okay, you've given me very little information, so all I can decipher from the email is that your child has high functioning autism, or, which isn't really a diagnosis, but essentially that your child is pretty high functioning, and that they wake up at 4:30. Did we get an age?
No, we did not.
So,
Oh, no, she did right below, 9 years old.
9 years old. So, yeah, that's a little problematic. Obviously, it's a lot problematic for the whole family. So I'd like to, here are a few things that you need to consider. I guess, what time does the child go to sleep? I mean, it is important. If you're 9 years old, you should probably the more sleep you get, the better, obviously. But if you get somewhere at least, I'd say 8 hours, 9 hours at this point would be very important for the child, and they'll do very well. So if your child's going to bed too early, then you should start keeping them up later. If you want them, let's say, and again, it has to do with what time they have to get ready for school and whatever else is going on. My kids get up at 6:30. Let's assume you want your child to sleep 2 hours later. And, if you probably should delay their time of going to sleep a little bit so that it's no more than 9 hours. If you feel that they're already going to sleep late enough and the child is just waking up early, it's important, when our kids get up early, there's two things that early or in the middle of the night, there's two particular, there's many, I guess, things that reinforce our kids when they get up, so it becomes a pattern. So for instance, one of the things we do wrong often is that when kids get up, we give them something to drink or eat. And the stomach is so easy to condition that the child, if you do that once or twice, the child will regularly get up because they're getting a food reinforcer as primary reinforcement. So they'll just get up. So you want to make sure your child does not have access to any food or drink when they get up. The second thing is, obviously, if he's jumping on the couch, it's sort of a fun activity. You don't really want to allow that, so I'm not sure how you would do that other than, not allowing him to jump on the couch. So whether you put something on the couch, have someone sleep on the couch, or something where it's impossible for him to get up and jump around. So you want to kind of prevent that. And then third thing is, in general, he also should not have a lot of times kids get up and come to our beds and try to sleep with us, and that's just a very heavy reinforcer as well. It's comfort and security and so on, and you don't want to let that happen. In other words, whatever you need to do, make sure that he's not having fun when he wakes up, right? At best, if he wakes up, ideally he should be left just in his own room without much to do. That will hopefully prevent or decrease the likelihood that he will find a reinforcer, so it'll not make sense to him to stay up that long. Obviously, if he has other sleep issues, there are various types of melatonin that can really help our kids sleep for a long, the duration of time they're meant to. And those are the main things. But yeah, it is an issue, and of course you can fix it. I mean, I have helped a lot of children with sleep problems.
Now, I'm glad you answered that part of the question. I want to cycle back to the other thing that I noticed in the question, because it's something that I hear from a lot of people, is the child is calm at school, comes home, and has a lot of energy and is bouncing off the walls when they're at home. And a lot of people say that. Now, on the one hand, I got to say, as a parent and as a former teacher, that makes a certain amount of sense to me. Because schools can sometimes be so structured, and the rules, if you have a good teacher, they lay down the law and say, this is what the rules are. And I personally have seen kids that can keep it together for a certain portion of the day because they know that that's the expectation. But is it okay to let them go bonkers when they come home, to let the steam off, or do we need to put the rules that much in place and not let that combustible thing happen?
I don't think it's ever really okay to let our kids go bonkers. I think that you need to balance their daily schedule in a way where they have a number of different things they can do. So, you want to make sure, that's also why we have PE in school, for instance. So you want to make sure that if your child needs some active time, you structure it so that it's good active time. It's not just craziness running around, jumping on couches and going bonkers, but it's maybe going outside and you have 30 minutes to jump on the trampoline.
Yeah.
You know, or you have a bike ride, or you have something that's structured, you know, and these days it's so easy to do that with like Wii and Connect and so on. Like you can have a completely go wild dance party for half an hour every time they come home if your child needs that, and some children's motors really do work faster. But I also think that, I mean, I think it's more, in my mind, it's more learned behavior than not, because if they are able to keep themselves regulated for the duration of school, which is generally about 8 hours, or maybe 7 hours or 6 hours even, it's a lot. It's a lot of time. You know, keeping yourself regulated for 4 hours indicates that you are capable of it. So I would, and that there's no chemical imbalance causing you to go wild. So I would tend to say that it would be healthy anyway for every child to have some physical activity, or a lot of our kids don't get enough physical activity. So I think the best thing to do is when they first come home is to start the session with, start their afternoon. Let's say most kids will get home around 3:30 or something. You know, do a half hour of physical activity, which is pretty strenuous physical activity, and then do a few hours of calmer activity, and if you need to, do another half hour of some sort of physical activity to wear them out at the end of the evening.
I love that advice. I keep thinking back to when Jem was really little. There were a group of friends that I had that they all had boys, and all their boys were older. And there's one friend that I have in particular that her boys are probably 7 years older than my son, and they are the best behaved, most wonderful, polite young men, do well in school, and we would all say to that mom, "What's your secret?" And she would say, "Run them like dogs."
Yeah, it's true, it's true.
That was her phrase. And we would go, "What does that mean?" And she said, "My kids, they're on the swim team, and they run every day, and I make sure that they get enough. They're too tired to mount any kind of..."
It's not a bad idea. That's absolutely true. It's very, very true. And you know, thanks for some reason what you said made me realize something else, which is often our kids wake up, one of the things I always want to look at, and I was about to forget to say this, is that we forget that our kids have much more, some of our kids have a heightened sense of sensory inputs. They have a much more sensitive sense of hearing, for instance, and vision. So you need to make sure that if your child's typically waking up at 4:30 a.m., make sure there's no external factor that's actually waking him up. For instance, sprinklers going off, or neighbor leaving the house that early, something that perhaps you don't hear but your child does hear. That's the most common thing I find, is that our kids hear something that's pretty remote, and that is what activates their waking cycle. It actually, believe it or not, significantly helps sleep when it's completely dark and completely quiet. Not completely quiet, but with background noise. White noise is a huge factor in promoting sleep. If you don't have one, get a air filter or purifier for your child's room. They produce an automatic white noise. If you don't want to spend money on one of those, just get a fan. They really produce a solid background of noise, which prevents your child from startling from other sudden noises or sounds. And those types of things help also. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. We were just talking about a question about sleep, and so I'm going to continue on with one. The last one was about a boy. This is about a girl, and kind of the flip side. The last one, he was very hyperactive. This one, very tired in the morning. Hello, I'm noticing my daughter is very tired in the mornings and can barely stay awake to eat breakfast. I put her down at 8 p.m. and wake her up at 5:45. I don't hear her all night, but I think she's waking up during the night. I'm a single mom. Please help and thanks. Some of the same advice applies. Yeah, it's similar stuff, but she's tired. She seems to be getting enough sleep, though. because she's getting 8:45 to 5:45. So
that's if she's
9 hours.
sleeping the whole time, though. She's concerned that it isn't.
Right. Well, I mean, you have, there are these recorders now that are motion activated that you can actually put in someone's room and it'll show you their sleep pattern, right? So you could do that, but you know, unless you have any other reason to suspect that she's awake during the night, I would just try to boost her energy, and generally anything that has more vitamin B in it will boost energy. So, and you know, honestly, you should probably go and see her pediatrician and get a blood test, because there's a variety of things. I mean, she could be low on iron. There's a number of things you want to be looking at.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
she could be hypothyroid. There's a lot of things you should be looking at here.
Okay, so definitely go trip to the pediatrician
Yeah,
is warranted
absolutely.
here.
Yeah. When we have that level of lethargy, it could also be, you know, various medications she's already on. You need to have that checked.
Okay, great. Which brings me, I want to remind everybody that next Tuesday is the Tuesday that we have Dr. Linda Copeland on. If you have specific questions for a developmental pediatrician who happens to also be a board-certified behavior analyst, you can be sending those in this week. She will be on next Tuesday in the 11 o'clock hour, and we'll be taking those questions. We do like to get questions for her in advance, so please be sending those in today and tomorrow. Okay, hi, my son's teacher said his desk is a mess. He's in 6th grade. What are some good organizational strategies we can use with him?
That's a good question. I don't know what kids' desks look like these days. I'm visualizing one of those that opens up, right? And you still have a desk there.
Well, Jem is in 6th grade, and and I think all schools are different. His is, you know, it's a flat top. It doesn't lift up, but you shove things in, so you never get a visual
so it's one of
those.
Right. Those things under there.
Yeah, and then we just toured a junior high school on Friday, and everything is in a locker at that point, which is a whole other thing. So
That's right. Well, actually, I mean, with my kids, even in elementary, they had lockers.
Really?
Yeah, they had cubbies, you know, which were very much like lockers. So, I mean, depending on what you're dealing with here, let's assume you have a desk like Jem's where you have to shove things in under the desk. The only way that you're going to help the child organize is by having little dividers in there, right, where the child can, and they have to be, and actually, you know what, you can order these. I order mine online for drawers at the house, and they're awesome because they can change size. And so they're little things like this, and you can pull them up and push them in, and they click and they lock into whatever size you want. So, for instance, if you can imagine the child's desk, all you do is you put a divider here and you put a divider there, let's say, and you can move them, right or left. You can put them close to each other. If you put two close to each other, then you have a nice little area for things like ruler, pencils, etc. And if you have, you know, a larger area perhaps for notebooks and a larger area for books or whatever else, they have papers. And that's a basic way to start. And you could just start teaching the child, you know, with one thing at a time. Yeah. You make their desk and then you say, hey, put all your papers on this side. And the best way is always to practice these types of things at home. So even if you don't have a similar desk at home, you can always take a box that's about the same size and have the child just put all their books on one side, papers on another, notebooks, and then pens and pencils and so on in the middle. But give them a divider. That really, really helps. So that's one concept. Organization skills with boys are generally very difficult. One thing, as I do this with my own son, one thing to keep in mind is that you have to figure out all the things that they are supposed to be, that they're expected to organize. Like, you know, my son, they receive back, and he's in high school, but they receive back so many different types of things, that they have folders and binders, and half of it is computerized and isn't. And so in other words, find out exactly what it is he's expected to put in his desk. Yeah. So that you can help make those things. You don't even have to order them. I mean, you could just take hard cardboard and fit it into those slots based on where the dividers should be. But definitely divide the desk, because it helps the child very much in terms of, just, you know, everything on the left should be a book and that sort of thing.
And, you know, what always strikes me as a former teacher is that if a teacher sends home a note and says, your child's desk is a mess, that it's maddening to me that they think you are supposed to be so
Well, yeah, I mean,
omnipotent.
First of all, it's not. My child is in your classroom.
Thank you.
You are supposed to be teaching my class how to organize his or her desk. It is part of what you do.
Right.
This is why my child is in school. It's like, it's
I love it. I love it when teachers, and I always think, oh, I'm so glad that my arm can stretch that far that it can be in his classroom to teach that to him.
It's almost like the teacher is blaming you and saying, you have a bad child who keeps their desk unorganized, so it's your fault and you better do something about it. It's just
and do it at home. And I do think that there are things that we can do at home, and the things that you've described. Of
course,
there are things that we can work on at home. But where is the personal responsibility on the behalf of that teacher? I would consider putting that in your child's IEP. Say, oh, we need an IEP meeting to make a goal in there, and then make it her responsibility to teach it.
Yeah, and or at the very minimum, just write back to the teacher and say, okay, thanks. What do you suggest?
Yeah.
Which
is much nicer than what I said.
You're supposed to be doing something about it, but here's some ideas. But let's see what the teacher says too.
And I honestly think it's part of this, because my son is in 6th grade, and his teacher teaches as part of her curriculum about how to keep their papers together. She's teaching them how to use an interactive notebook and take Cornell notes.
Right.
I think it's part of the 6th grade curriculum to get them ready for 7th grade that they're supposed to be teaching organization skills.
Absolutely. It's just so difficult.
I'm a little dumbfounded.
But it goes hand in hand, Shannon, and we both get pretty riled up about these things. I get riled up because it's similar to, I just had a couple days ago an email from one of the major managed healthcare companies that we work with, where they were basically saying that, they don't see enough evidence, and you'll love this, they don't see enough evidence of us doing parent training. And, meanwhile, parent training is so embedded in our program and I came up with the whole concept of how to do clinics 20 years ago, and everybody else in the universe does clinics now, which includes some parent training. But then on top of that, of course, we have our family education and family support program through Vince Redmond, and then on top of that, we also have IBT. I mean, which other provider has actually produced the company for training? And we have IBT, and we provide a lot of free training to our parents as well through IBT. Yeah. But having said that, the whole emphasis of this field, the more, I am not a parent of a child with autism, but I'm definitely on that team, let me tell you.
Yes.
And it irritates me when the more, there's so much pressure put on parents to fix it. And it just irritates me because this is how many other fields do you know? How many other disorders or illnesses do you know where parents are educating themselves and then educating the world about the dietary needs of our children, the behavioral needs, the educational needs, you name it, sleep. Yeah. Nobody tells the parents what other disorder is there. Like, think if your child had diabetes or, God forbid, cancer or something like that. Are you expected to go learn everything you're supposed to do for your child through going to conferences and reading online and then do it all yourself? Are you expected to figure out how to do chemotherapy and hook your child up? Yeah. This is the same thing. It's like, I don't even understand why a funding source would come and say parents are not doing enough. It doesn't. What business is it of yours what they're doing? You're the funding source. Yes. Pay for their treatment. That's your job.
Yes.
Who said that parents should be doing anything?
Yes.
This is what really upsets me. Now, I am of course a very strong believer that the parents who are more involved, their children tend to do better with ABA.
Absolutely.
Because it is a lifelong thing. But you know what? This is what people don't understand. 20-somewhat years ago, we came and said, okay, 40 hours of therapy is integral. And I was trying to go back in my mind and think, where did we come up with 40 hours? Was it a study where we did 35 versus 40 versus 45? No. The reason we said 40 hours was because when we did the study, we were using, and I'll say this because I was at UCLA, I was involved with all this, we were using students. We were using college students who were getting course credit. And actually, we never even really said 40 hours. We said all waking hours. And our point was that therapists would do approximately 40 hours, and parents are anyway doing the rest of the time. Right. They're generalizing, they're intervening behaviorally, and so on. So if you really think about it, a child who's awake let's say 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're talking, parents in general. So if out of a 12-hour time frame, we're only really doing about 8 hours of it, and then the weekend we're not, 40 hours is 5 times 8, right?
Right.
So there's every single day the parent is covering 4 hours of it, and on the weekend they're covering all of it.
Yeah.
Guess what? Parents are involved. They have to be involved. They're the ones dealing with the children before anybody else does.
Yeah.
So the fact that we say, oh, parents aren't involved enough just irritates me.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, the parents have to go to work. If they don't go to work, who's going to pay for the rest of this stuff?
Right.
And so, people need to have a little bit more compassion in regards to what a parent of a child with autism actually goes through and lives through, and not keep blaming parents, not keep throwing more at parents and saying, hey, by the way, your child's cubby isn't organized. I mean, good Lord. Sorry, I went on a rant there.
No, sister, you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah,
we love it.
I just feel like there's no reality check here for people who don't have children with autism. It's like, are you serious?
Thank you. And that is why we love you so much.
Okay, thank you.
One of the many reasons why we love Dr. Granpeesheh. But somebody wrote back in and said, thank you so much for the pep talk on compliance, but when giving verbal praise, how do we avoid over-praising? Like saying, thanks for coming over, and the child becomes dependent on the praise. They also have said how much they love the A word, and they said thank you, that they're always learning. But I think that that's a great question, and I would love for you to help us all understand about, is there the possibility of overpraising, first of all?
Yeah, there is the possibility of overpraising. It's not so much the possibility of overpraising, but it's the possibility of overdependence on praise.
Okay.
So it's sort of, and my formula is always this. It's very, very simple. So every behavior, we started out talking about compliance or non-compliance, really. So let's look at the positive intervention that goes into reducing non-compliance, which means increasing compliance, obviously. So on the one hand, any behavior you have two sets of contingencies, obviously, that affect the behavior. So one is the antecedent, one is the consequence. So reward is always the consequence. So let's go back and talk about the antecedent for a minute. Okay. And the antecedent is usually we're talking about, how can I make this easier? What signal can I give the child of what I want? So you always have to ask first, does the child understand what I'm asking for? What is it that my expectation is? Sometimes the error is just in that. A lot of times we tell our kids, can you wait? And they don't know what that means. They don't know how long. They don't know what it means. They don't know if they're going to get the item they want if they wait. They just don't comprehend the concept of waiting. So the first thing is on the antecedent stuff. So the stuff that happens before the behavior. It's important to make sure you're clear. Like, these are very important things, that what you are requesting is very clear and understood by the child. When we say compliance, what does that mean? Comply with what? Be very clear with the child. Some of the children need visual instruction in order for them to understand. Some of them need little cues like a timer for them to understand. These are all different antecedent manipulations that we make in order for the child to really understand what is being asked of them. Okay, so that's number one, most important thing. Then you have to also make sure that the difficulty level of the thing that's being asked is manageable, right? So for instance, finish this whole page versus finish this one question. And the difficulty, if it's too hard, obviously is going to cause non-compliance, tantruming, and all this sort of stuff. So the one way of making things a lot easier for the child and understood is modeling, prompting. So you can either prompt the child, which means physically or otherwise help the child, aid the child, assist, or you can actually model the whole thing by showing the child how to do it by watching you. So these are, again, forms of antecedent manipulation. They're not really, the prompt occurs at the same time as you give your instruction. Okay. And it's very important to say, do this, and then actually prompt the child so that they are successful. So these things are just as important at the level of praise you give after the behavior has occurred. So in other words, you want to make sure that what we just said is it's clear and it's easy, okay? So now that's very important. You always begin asking for something that's easy, so low demand, and then you reinforce it or praise it massively. So high reinforcer, low demand, high praise, low demand, high praise. That's how you start anything, okay? Whether it's a math problem, just imitation, clapping, snowboarding, whatever, social behavior. It doesn't matter what it is.
So it doesn't matter the age of the child, whatever the skill is that you're trying to teach, this is the formula.
This is how you start, because it's a new skill.
Right.
When it's a new skill, you want to make it as easy as possible and praise it as much as possible when it occurs correctly. The reason you make it as easy as possible is because you want the child to gain access to that reinforcer very easily.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'll get turned off, avoidance, all this sort of other stuff. So easy as possible, highly rewarded. As the child masters whatever it is you're asking, you reduce the reward. Okay, so now I'm asking you, yesterday I asked you to do this and I would give you food for it. Now I'm asking you to do this, and every other time I'll just tell you good job. Okay, so you start to reduce the reinforcer because the child's mastering this. Now, why do you do that? And that's the concept of can you overpraise? Yes, you can. You can cause the child to be dependent. And this is in behavioral terminology, it's sort of a more complex thing called schedules of reinforcement.
Okay.
So where you can start with what's considered a continuous schedule. That means you will reinforce the child every time they do a behavior, a specific thing, and that's a continuous schedule. If you keep the child on that schedule, so they start to expect that reinforcer every single time.
Right.
Then if you stop, the child's behavior will extinguish. So in other words, the child has now learned that every time I do my homework, I'll just think of something random, I will come home and I'll get candy.
Right.
Okay, so that's my reinforcer, and it's a meaningful connection there.
Yeah.
Okay. As soon as, like 1 or 2 days, they don't get candy, they're not going to do their homework anymore. It's just really, that's behavior. That's how behavior happens. Now, in order for that not to happen, what you do is you put the child on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. So
which I call the slot machine.
The slot machine. Well, the slot machine is a very particular type of intermittent.
Oh, okay.
So there's different types of intermittent schedules. So the intermittent schedules can be based on duration of time passage, or they can be based on number of responses. So that's called an interval variable. Well, let's even talk about a fixed interval. Fixed interval schedule means that you'll get a reward every third time. Every so many seconds or every so many minutes. So you'll get a reward every 30 seconds. Okay, as long as you've responded once. As long as you've responded once, you'll get a reward.
So that's the fixed interval.
Fixed interval. Fixed ratio means for every third, for every fifth response. So it's a ratio of number of responses. Okay. Each have their own purpose, but they're fixed. And that means like it's every third.
Right.
And believe it or not, our kids figure that out.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
So what happens is typically on a fixed interval schedule, the person who's responding waits until the very last. They figure out it's approximately this period of time. So they wait and they won't respond until right before that 30 seconds, and then they'll respond once, and then you'll get your reinforcer. With interval, they'll just do the 3 and then dilly-dally for the rest of the time. Okay? So both have their problems, both have their strengths, but both have their problems. So then there's other types of intermittent, which are variables. Variable interval or variable ratio. Variable interval means you vary the average time. So it's not 30 seconds, it's an average of 30 seconds. So one time it could be 40 seconds, another time it could be 20 seconds that you're getting the reinforcer, and it's an average of 30. So that would be called a variable interval 30 seconds.
Okay,
that's a type of reinforcement.
We're in jargon land today. We're learning. We're learning. Okay.
The slot machine is a variable ratio. Variable ratio means you will win sometimes on 2 slots.
Right.
Sometimes on 5. Sometimes on 4. So it varies. So you never really know. Now, clever people will actually sit and observe a slot machine. Every slot machine has a ratio, an average ratio. So if you actually observed the slot machine, you'd see that oh, the variable ratio on this is 27. That means that on the average, every 27 slots, somebody wins.
Right.
And so, the lower that number is, the more it pays off. But basically, what I'm trying to say in terms of our kids is, you change the schedule of reinforcement. So when you start with a continuous, so like every time the child does homework, you praise them, okay, with some sort of, food reinforcer or heavy-duty reinforcer. Now what you start to do is every time they do their homework, you praise them every other time. You don't always praise them. You praise them less, like let's say the frequency could be, instead of praising them every 30 minutes, you'll come and check on them every hour. Or you could do it on a ratio schedule. You could reinforce them for every page of homework, right? And then now you're gradually going to make it every 2 pages of homework, whatever. You start to fade the amount, the richness of the reinforcer. You reduce it. So it's called a thinning schedule of reinforcement. You make it thinner, leaner. You don't reinforce as much. Now what you start to do is make the demand higher too. You start to make it harder, right? They're going to a harder level of homework. And this is naturally, they're in school, so as the year progresses, it gets harder, right? Stuff builds upon older stuff. So that stuff starts to get harder, and now you have a lower reinforcer. You have to balance these, okay? So it's a continuous, this is what makes ABA effective, is how much reward am I getting for the difficulty of the task that's being asked of me? Okay, now remember that. So when Hank says, how much praise is this child getting? That means that he needs more praise for paying attention. For some of our kids, it's very hard to pay attention. It's not as easy as it is for us. They really need more praise.
Yeah.
So balancing the reinforcer and the difficulty of the task is what prevents you from making the child dependent. And you have to do that. And you constantly have to make the reinforcer enough that it's motivating the child, but not so predictable that the child depends on that and will never do it just for their own sake. And this is very important because, with our kids, we don't want them to just have external reinforcers, right? We want them to eventually change and just do things for pride, for ego, for their own sense of accomplishment. Right. And so, modifying reinforcers and making it so that the number one thing our kids are missing is that they don't pay enough attention to parents to want to make parents proud, right? But if your child wants to make you proud, the rest of their life they're doing stuff just for that. So it's sort of important to make sure that the reinforcer level is enough, but not too much. And you always have to vary that based on how difficult is the task.
Wow.
It's a very long answer to a very...
Well, but you know what? It makes me happy because my kid is very in tune to that. He wants to make us happy.
And it's all about the child's happiness factor and whether they're learning. I mean, if you see a child who's really non-compliant, really unhappy all the time, you got to ask yourself, are they getting enough reinforcers in their life, in their world? It's not just from you, it's from everything, from their friends, from their school, from their society, from the things they watch on TV. Do they even know how to reward themselves? This is something we don't teach our kids, and we really should, because otherwise they'll start depending on bad habits. It's so important to make sure that, one of the things I've done with my kids their whole lives is I taught them to put their study schedule on a schedule. It's you will study for 2 hours, then you need to come downstairs and we're definitely doing something fun for half an hour, an hour, or whatever time it is. I do their whole day for them that way. And it's so important to teach them to reward their own accomplishments and to realize, I've done enough for now, I need to go do something fun.
I love hearing that. That's really important for all of our kids.
Okay. Go ahead. My son, Wyatt, who you know very well, loves cake. Now, we make GFCF cake, and we then make a GFCF icing, and I've even found a carnation. It's food coloring, but it's all natural because it's made from carnations. So we can make a pink cake, right?
Very nice.
So he loves cake. You put that in the shape of a cupcake, he says no.
Okay.
What is that about?
Well, he probably, I'm assuming, that's called overselectivity, by the way. That's what it's called.
Jargon called.
Overselectivity. It is jargon day today, my gosh. So I did my master's on overselectivity, so I kind of know a lot about overselectivity. Overselectivity this was my master's. So I taught children how to identify their picture of their parents, right? This is mommy, touch daddy, for instance, or give me mommy, daddy, so or identify verbally if they could. And then I took the pictures. This is back in the day when we didn't have computers and all that, right? So, and then we modified the pictures. Like we would change hair color or put glasses on or put facial hair on the men, that sort of thing. Half the kids couldn't identify anymore with slight modifications. So that was a series of different things that we started studying, and we realized that our kids learn things based on one key feature. So like, let's say you and I, we might learn something new, like cake. Okay. So we'll learn cakes are of all different shapes and sizes. What actually differentiates a cake from a cupcake is only the shape.
Right.
Nothing else matters because they're pretty much made of the same stuff.
Right.
Okay. To Wyatt, that's not true. To Wyatt, in the past, he's had cupcakes that did not taste very good and cakes that did. And so in his mind, it's not just the shape, they're a different product. And that's overselectivity because he's focusing just on the shape. He's learned it based on things that are this shape don't taste good, things that are this shape do.
Okay.
So he's just not willing to. So this is how you do it. This is how you fix this if you want to fix this.
Yeah, I'd like to, because you know, sometimes making cupcakes is more convenient to take to a party.
Make a cake.
Okay.
And then have the cupcake papers and have Wyatt cut them out and put them in the papers.
Okay.
Okay, so that he will gradually start to understand it is the same thing.
Okay.
Love it.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
You do that a few times, and then the next time you make cupcakes, he won't know the difference.
Okay.
So my son is 9.5. He has language, but doesn't get into normal communication cues. He was a late diagnosis, so we have tons of challenging behaviors, insisting on routine, repetitive behaviors. Now on meds due to challenging, aggressive behaviors in other situations. Can you tell me the meaning of high-functioning ASD? I was told once it is based on language. Then my son is high-functioning, ? However, he does not behave like a typical 9-year-old, more like 5. He's very immature for his age, but super smart. He's not even a bit independent in any way. Everything has to be told and prompted. In his mind, nothing matters but his own interest. How is he high-functioning if his life skills are low? He won't even pay attention to his surroundings and needs constant support and reminders for everything. Is that considered a 2 in the DSM-5? And they said, sorry, I'm very confused on what the meaning is, and I'm thankful that he can speak, but everything else in his life is a challenge. He just learned to use a zipper. And they said, thank you.
What a fabulous parent.
Yes.
I love parents like this. They're just
and I so relate to this question. I feel like I'm hearing Wyatt at 9. This is very similar.
Yeah.
I want to let her know this was where my son was at 9.
Right. So, you know, it's interesting. I have a lot to say about this, and I'll try to do it in 4 minutes, which is going to be hard. But first thing is that the new DSM diagnosis actually doesn't depend on language at all. You don't have to have a language deficit at all in order to fit the criteria right? You could have all the others.
Right.
But so, and as long as, and if you have like social deficits and so on, you could potentially get the diagnosis if you have enough other issues like sensory
and that's because that's the old Asperger end of things that's being included in the ASD. Okay, that makes sense.
Exactly. Very good point. So now, when I hear about children, and why it definitely fits this cue, is that have high repetitive behaviors, really wanting routine. I mean, routine and repetitive behaviors don't even come close to Wyatt's universe. Like, you know, Wyatt's universe, everything has to be in a particular way. We talked about like so many things. Like he has so many of these, and to me, there's different levels of this. In general, this type of behavior starts from anxiety. It just does. It is when you have anxiety, you try to put things in order. This is what, everybody does this. There's no question at all if you analyze your own behavior, which is why, you know, obsessive compulsive behavior, which used to be classified as one of the anxiety disorders, it is in my mind still, is just putting things in order because you're trying to gain control. Compulsions help you calm down your obsessions. Okay. So at some point, these things start with anxiety. When I look at kids with, like Wyatt, for instance, I don't see so much daily anxiety like right now, as I do see that they've developed these patterns which are now non-functional, but they do give them a sense of security in the world, and so they maintain those patterns. So there's two things with this, to me it's still all OCD. And so when you look at it, there's medication does help. There's no question that medication does help because you care less. You just sort of, things are not as important. They don't have to be a certain way to some extent. And then there's still sort of making the routines as functional as possible. We all have routines. So we just hide them. Like, how would you feel if I said for the next week you cannot go on a run?
I'm okay with that because I'm not running anymore. I'm walking. But if you'd done that to me a year ago, it would have made me crazy.
Right?
Oh, when they change where my monitor is here, I'm a grumpy Gus, and I flip out for a week.
Why?
Yeah, I'm afraid to go get my computer upgraded because I'm afraid I'll lose something.
There you go, right? And those are safety-giving routines. It's exactly, great example. I just got a new phone because mine's having problems. I'm dreading changing it.
I hate changing
because I
phones.
think, like, change.
Yeah.
So change is breaking a routine, right? And change provokes anxiety. And always remember that. So now this is a 9.5-year-old who really craves routines and repetitive behaviors. So the first thing we have to think is he's craving some sort of security, safety. He has a little bit of anxiety. You have to remember that about him. And he's getting aggressive. And mom said something about, or whoever parent wrote in, said something about he's very much about his own world.
Yeah.
I find a lot of our older kids who are anxious tend to become very egocentric, very self-centered. It's not because they are bad people in any way. It's just that they have a deficit in theory of mind, first of all. They have a hard time looking at the world from anyone else's perspective, and you've taken care of them. So they've been fed the concept of it's okay to just be taken care of. The more the better. Take care of me. Things have to be better for me, So they end up being somewhat self-centered in that sense, and the world surrounds their needs. They have a very hard time with seeing the world like, hey, mom has her own needs too. But actually most kids have this problem, but it's much more prevalent in our kids, obviously. So this is a child who has a need for routines, and they also are a little bit, they have a very hard time looking at things from anyone else's perspective. And they're getting aggressive. Now, really important thing, aggression has nothing to, aggression is this, probably in your child. The world is chaotic, I have to put it in order. I'm not really getting my needs met. You have to figure out why the aggression is happening. The aggression is not anything other than something that they could communicate otherwise. Aggression is frustration. Aggression is saying, I'm frustrated because there's not enough routine in my life. Aggression is saying, I'm frustrated because things are not going my way. You have to kind of figure out what it is for your child. And believe me, it's always going to be there's always a reason for the aggression. If your child has a lot of language, great. You have to teach them ways to communicate that aggression. That is going to be the most helpful. You asked, is the child high functioning or not? I mean, I would still say yes. Any child whose major issues surround obsessive behavior and they have really adequate language, yes, they're still high functioning. They're still considered high functioning. The fact that like in Wyatt's case, I feel like his obsessions are so prevalent that they hold him back a million ways, just like an OCD patient. Like an OCD patient becomes agoraphobic. They don't even want to leave their house because they consider everything to be out of control, out of order. And Wyatt, in a lot of ways, I see that with him. He's held back because of these pervasive needs to have things a certain way.
Yes.
But it's not his brain is still functioning very well. He can have a conversation about things, but he's so distracted and so on and so forth with these things that it holds him back. This child sounds like they have a lot of language, so yes, I would still consider them high functioning, but you have to really focus on the things that the child needs. If there's still, what was the last thing they wrote that the child still doesn't do? That's something you could easily
just learned how to zipper.
Yeah.
And that there's that the amount of support that they need for their life skills is really quite overwhelming.
Right.
Just learn zipper.
So now here's what's interesting is like with our typical kids, it all goes together, right? If you have language, you generally are adaptively about the same, and that's why everything ends up being a mean of 100, right? It's like on every scale you end up being average, right? Most people, whether it's language or fine motor or gross motor or whatever, we're all average with some areas that were like excellent or better and some areas that were less good, right? But we're still forming that normal table. With our kids, don't think that because he has language that means his fine motor is going to be somewhere around the same. Zipper skills that's just a fine motor skill. Like, teach him how to do that. If you're talking about embarrassment or social understanding that your zipper needs to be up, teach him how to do that. The fact that his languages, or like with our kids, any skill, you know, we have the 8 domains in skills, they don't interrelate like with typical kids. You could be up here on one and down here on another. Has nothing to do with each other. If you are still able to communicate your needs, you're pretty high functioning. You're in better place than most others are. You're just delayed on all these other areas. You need more time. And that's what happens. The problem is our kids get older, and then there's no time to teach them all these things.
And here's something I found with children like this, which my son is like this mom's, that certain routines that your child has that give them that order, keep them from progressing if you enable those routines.
Very good point.
And sometimes it's better. For example, Wyatt wants me every night to put his socks on before he goes to bed. Reed won't do it. Reed will say no. I'm like, well, that's kind of a mommy thing to do, you know.
Yeah.
If I don't do it, I get a semi-meltdown. I want you to put my socks on. Sometimes better to let them have that meltdown, get them used to doing their own thing, than do it for them.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise you're just perpetuating having the meltdown later, correct?
Absolutely right. And there's so many sides to this, Nancy. One is, I always tell people, pick your battles, right? So it's up to you. If you have 50 other things going on in your life at that moment, just don't deal with the socks. Leave it alone.
And don't do it as you're walking out the door to school, because that's going to cause a whole other thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you do decide that it's time to replace that behavior, replace it. Give him something else. You know, and also, if you're going to work on this, shape it. You don't have to suddenly say, today I'm not doing it anymore. You could start by saying, I'm only going to do the left one, you do the right one. And do that for a month.
Okay.
And after a month, you'll say, hey, I'm just going to put it on your toes, you do the rest. You know what I mean? Shape it out, fade it out. So do it in a way that works. But then also, it still is an indication of what's the message to you. It's always like, I can fix the behavior, but what's the behavior telling you is that he needs some sort of mommy type thing at the end of the night.
So replace it with
a stuffed animal, whatever's normal.
Telling a story, reading together, that time.
Hug him. Instead of it, I'm going to hug you. I'm going to lay down with you instead of whatever.
There you go.
Replace this with a typical behavior.